The photographs scattered across the hardwood floor like fallen leaves, each image a dagger through Sarah's chest. Her hands trembled as she picked up the first one. Marcus, her husband of 8 years, his arms wrapped intimately around Elena, her younger sister. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, the same day Marcus claimed he was working late at the architectural firm, the same day Elena said she was visiting their mother in Phoenix. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's knees buckled as she sank onto the couch in their Denver living room, the manila envelope that had arrived with no return address now empty beside her. 23 photographs documented a months-long affair between the two people she trusted most in the world. Her breath came in short gasps as she studied each image, looking for some explanation, some innocent context that could make this nightmare disappear. The final photograph stopped her cold. Marcus and Elena kissing passionately outside the Marriott downtown, Elena's hand resting on what appeared to be a small bump beneath her flowing dress. Sarah's world tilted as the implication hit her like a freight train. She was looking at her sister carrying her husband's child while she herself had been trying unsuccessfully to conceive for 3 years. The sound of keys jingling in the front door made Sarah scramble to gather the photographs. Marcus's voice echoed through the hallway as he called out his usual greeting, unaware that his wife had just discovered the secret that would shatter their marriage. Sarah's hand shook as she shoved the images back into the envelope, her mind racing between confrontation and denial, between rage and devastation. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his dark hair tousled from the October wind, his smile fading as he took in Sarah's pale complexion and tear-stained cheeks. His briefcase hit the floor with a thud as concern replaced his casual demeanor. Something had shifted in the air between them, an invisible fault line that would soon split their life in two. Sarah had always been the steady one, the reliable older sister who cleaned up messes and solved problems. At 34, she managed the pediatric wing at Denver General Hospital, a job that required calm under pressure and endless compassion. Her colleagues respected her unflappable nature, her ability to comfort grieving parents and coordinate complex medical cases without losing her composure. But sitting in her own living room with evidence of ultimate betrayal, that carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Elena, 3 years younger and perpetually dramatic, had always been the family favorite. Their parents, David and Margaret, had doted on Elena's artistic temperament and striking beauty, making excuses for her impulsivity and financial irresponsibility. Sarah had spent decades playing the responsible daughter, lending Elena money, covering for her mistakes, and listening to endless stories of romantic disasters and career setbacks. When Elena moved to Denver 2 years ago after another failed relationship in Los Angeles, Sarah and Marcus had welcomed her with open arms. They helped her find an apartment, Marcus used his connections to get her freelance graphic design work, and Sarah included her in every family gathering and social event. Elena had seemed genuinely grateful, finally showing signs of maturity and stability that their parents had always insisted were just beneath her chaotic surface. The irony cut deep as Sarah remembered the countless conversations where Elena praised Marcus as the perfect husband, claiming she envied Sarah's stable marriage and hoping to find someone equally devoted someday. Elena had been maid of honor at their wedding, giving a tearful speech about how Marcus was everything Sarah deserved after years of disappointing relationships. She had been Sarah's confidant during the fertility struggles, offering shoulder massages during hormone treatments and bringing ice cream during the darkest moments of repeated pregnancy losses. Marcus entered the living room cautiously, his architect's eye immediately cataloging the disrupted space and Sarah's defensive posture. He had always been intuitive about her moods, a quality that made him an exceptional husband during their good times and an effective liar during what Sarah now realized had been months of deception. His concern appeared genuine as he approached the couch, but Sarah flinched away from his touch for the first time in their marriage. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Sarah's lap, as she debated whether to confront him immediately or gather more information first. Part of her wanted to scream and throw the photographs in his face, to demand explanations and watch him scramble for excuses. Another part wanted to pretend she had never seen them, to continue living in ignorant bliss rather than face the complete destruction of her family and future. Marcus sat on the edge of the coffee table, his knees almost touching hers as he searched her face for clues about her distress. His wedding ring caught the afternoon light streaming through their bay window, the same ring she had slipped onto his finger 8 years ago in her parents' backyard garden. Sarah stared at that ring and wondered how many times he had twisted it nervously while lying to her face about working late or attending client dinners that were actually secret meetings with her sister. The weight of 3 years of fertility treatments pressed down on Sarah as she considered Elena's apparent pregnancy. The hormone injections that left her bloated and emotional, the invasive procedures that Marcus had held her hand through, and the devastating miscarriage last spring that had left them both heartbroken and desperate. While Sarah's body failed to carry their child, Elena had apparently been carrying Marcus's baby with ease, flaunting her fertility as the ultimate betrayal. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced down to see Elena's name on the screen. The message was typically self-centered, asking if Sarah could cover her portion of their parents' anniversary gift because she was short on cash again. The casual manipulation, so familiar after decades of Elena's financial irresponsibility, now felt like salt in an open wound. Elena was asking for money while carrying Sarah's husband's child. Marcus reached for Sarah's phone, a gesture that would have been natural just hours earlier, but now felt intrusive and controlling. Sarah pulled the device away instinctively, noting how his eyes lingered on Elena's name on the screen. A flash of something passed across his features, too quick to identify, but significant enough to confirm Sarah's worst suspicions. He knew about the message, possibly because he and Elena had coordinated their communications to avoid exactly this kind of discovery. The afternoon light was fading as Sarah struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
This was not a simple affair that could be addressed through counseling and forgiveness. Elena was family, woven into every aspect of their social circle and future plans. She was supposed to be the fun aunt to Sarah and Marcus's children, the godmother who would spoil their babies and provide comic relief during family gatherings. Instead, she was carrying the child that Sarah had desperately wanted, conceived through the ultimate violation of trust and loyalty. Sarah's mind wandered to the baby shower she had already begun planning in her head for when she finally achieved a successful pregnancy. She had imagined Elena helping with decorations and organizing games, being genuinely excited about becoming an aunt. The cruel irony was that Elena would indeed become an aunt, but as the mother of Sarah's husband's child, creating a family dynamic so twisted that Sarah could barely comprehend it. Marcus was speaking, his voice seeming to come from far away as Sarah retreated into shock. He was asking about her day, whether she had received bad news about a patient or her parents, his tone gentle and concerned in a way that would have comforted her during any other crisis. But his caring felt poisonous now, tainted by the knowledge that he was capable of such elaborate deception while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband. The photographs had been taken by a professional, someone with expensive equipment and an eye for capturing compromising moments. Sarah wondered who had hired the investigator and why they had chosen to send the evidence to her anonymously. The timing suggested someone wanted her to discover the affair now, perhaps before Elena's pregnancy became impossible to hide or before some other significant event occurred. Sarah thought about the recent changes in Marcus's behavior that she had attributed to work stress, the late nights that became more frequent, the weekend golf games that seemed to run longer than usual, the new cologne that appeared in their bathroom without explanation. She had been so trusting, so focused on her own career and their fertility struggles that she had missed the signs of his growing distance and deception. Elena's behavior had shifted too, though Sarah had interpreted it as evidence of newfound maturity. Elena had been less available for their usual sister dinners, claiming busy work schedules and new social commitments. She had stopped asking for money as frequently, which Sarah had celebrated as a sign of financial responsibility.
Now she realized Elena probably had a new source of support, someone who was happy to finance her lifestyle in exchange for her affections. The baby changed everything. An affair could theoretically be forgiven, worked through with professional help and genuine commitment to rebuilding trust. But a pregnancy created permanent connections that would bind Marcus and Elena together for life. Sarah would never be able to escape reminders of their betrayal, never experience holidays or family gatherings without the presence of their child as a living symbol of their deception. Sarah's career at the hospital had taught her about family dynamics, about how children born from affairs often struggled with identity and loyalty issues. She had counseled parents through similar situations, helping them navigate custody arrangements and co-parenting relationships after infidelity. But those had been other people's problems, complex situations she could approach with professional detachment. This was her life imploding in real time. Marcus was growing more agitated as Sarah remained silent, his questions becoming more specific and pressing. She could see him calculating potential explanations for her distress, preparing responses for scenarios he hoped would not arise. His anxiety confirmed that he was hiding something significant, that her obvious emotional state threatened some carefully constructed lie that he was not prepared to abandon. The house they had purchased together 5 years ago suddenly felt like a monument to their failed marriage. Every room held memories of their shared life, from the kitchen, where they cooked dinner together most evenings, to the guest bedroom they had optimistically designated as a future nursery. Sarah wondered if Marcus had brought Elena here during their affair, if they had violated the sanctuary of their home along with their marriage vows. The mortgage they shared, the joint bank accounts, the vacation they had booked for Mexico for next month, all of it would need to be untangled and divided. Sarah realized she had no idea how to separate a life so thoroughly intertwined, no experience with the practical aspects of divorce and betrayal. She had always been the person others came to for advice and support during their relationship crises, never imagining she would need such guidance herself. Sarah's parents would be devastated when they learned about the affair, but their reaction to Elena's pregnancy would be even more complicated. David and Margaret had been pressuring Sarah and Marcus about grandchildren for years, making subtle comments about their biological clock and suggesting fertility specialists. The irony of that Elena would provide their first grandchild through such circumstances would create family rifts that might never heal. The extended family dynamics would be impossible to navigate. Holiday gatherings, weddings, graduations, all would require careful choreography to avoid forcing people to choose sides or creating uncomfortable encounters. Some relatives would inevitably blame Sarah for not satisfying her husband, while others would condemn Elena for betraying her sister. The family that had been Sarah's foundation would fracture into competing loyalties and bitter resentments. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as his patience finally snapped. His reflection in the glass showed a man wrestling with his own secrets, someone who had been living a double life for months and was beginning to suspect that his careful compartmentalization was about to collapse. When he turned back to face Sarah, his expression had hardened into something she barely recognized. Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her as the initial shock gave way to cold clarity. The man she had loved and trusted for nearly a decade was a stranger, someone capable of elaborate deception and breathtaking cruelty. The sister she had supported and defended throughout their lives was equally unrecognizable, transformed from family ally into ultimate enemy. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it was a growing anger that would soon demand action. The photographs lay between them like a bridge Sarah would have to cross to reach the truth.
She could continue pretending ignorance, allowing Marcus and Elena to maintain their charade while she gathered more evidence and prepared for the confrontation to come. Or she could end the deception immediately, forcing them to acknowledge their betrayal and begin the painful process of rebuilding her life without them. Marcus was asking direct questions now, demanding to know what had upset her and whether it involved him.
His tone had shifted from concern to defensiveness, a change that confirmed his guilt as clearly as any confession. Sarah studied his face, looking for traces of the man she had married, finding only a skilled manipulator who had been playing a role for months while living an entirely different reality with her sister. The decision crystallized as Sarah realized she could never unknow what she had learned. The photographs had destroyed her marriage and her relationship with Elena irrevocably, regardless of what happened next. Her only choice was how to respond to the betrayal, whether to collapse under its weight or to fight back against the people who had stolen her future and twisted her family into something unrecognizable. Sarah stood up slowly, the envelope clutched in her hands like evidence in a trial that would determine the fate of everyone she had ever loved. Marcus stepped toward her, his architect's hands reaching out in a gesture that might have been comfort or control, but Sarah was done being managed and manipulated, finished with being the reliable sister and trusting wife who cleaned up messes and ignored warning signs. The sun was setting outside their window, painting the room in shades of amber and gold that reminded Sarah of better times. But those memories felt like someone else's life now, a naive woman's fantasy about love and loyalty that had been shattered by two people who had pretended to care about her while planning her destruction. The real Sarah, the one who would emerge from this betrayal, was someone harder and less trusting, someone who would demand truth and accountability from the ruins of her former life. Marcus was close enough now that she could smell the cologne Elena had probably helped him choose, could see the guilt written in the lines around his eyes that she had attributed to work pressure. Every detail of their life together was being recontextualized through the lens of his deception. Every memory poisoned by the knowledge of what he was really thinking and feeling during moments she had believed were genuine. The photographs felt warm in Sarah's hands as she prepared to cross the point of no return. Once she revealed her knowledge, there would be no pretending, no careful preservation of appearances or gradual discovery of truth. The explosion would destroy everything immediately, forcing all of them to navigate the aftermath without the comfortable lies that had sustained their relationships for months. Sarah took a deep breath and pulled the first photograph from the envelope, holding it up so Marcus could see his own face staring back at him in Elena's embrace. His reaction was immediate and devastating, the color draining from his features as he realized his double life had been discovered. There was no innocent explanation he could offer, no way to spin the intimate images into something less damaging than they appeared. The silence stretched between them as Marcus processed the implications of exposure. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, all of his calculations and precautions proven worthless against whoever had documented his affair so thoroughly. Sarah watched him search for words, for some way to minimize or explain what could not be minimized or explained, and felt a bitter satisfaction at his obvious panic. Elena's pregnancy would become public knowledge soon, if it had not already. The photographs suggested the affair had been ongoing for months, plenty of time for other people to notice changes in their behavior or to draw connections between their absences and secret meetings. Sarah realized she might be the last person to learn about the betrayal, that friends and colleagues had possibly been pitying her ignorance, while she continued to play the role of supportive wife and sister. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible, as he asked where the photographs had come from and how long she had known. His questions revealed his priorities clearly, focusing on damage control rather than apology or explanation. He was already calculating how to manage the crisis he had created, how to minimize consequences and preserve whatever could be saved from the wreckage of their deception. Sarah felt a cold fury building as she realized Marcus was more concerned about exposure than about the pain he had caused her. His immediate response was tactical rather than emotional, the reaction of someone who viewed their marriage as a problem to be solved rather than a relationship to be repaired. The man she had loved was revealing himself to be someone fundamentally different from who she had believed him to be. The photographs told a story of planning and intention rather than impulsive passion. Marcus and Elena had made deliberate choices over months of deception, creating opportunities to be together while maintaining elaborate lies about their activities and whereabouts. This was not a mistake or momentary weakness, but a sustained campaign of betrayal that required constant coordination and mutual commitment to deceiving Sarah. Sarah's hands were steady now as she spread more photographs across the coffee table, creating a visual timeline of her husband's affair with her sister. Each image represented a moment when both of them had chosen betrayal over loyalty, passion over responsibility, their own desires over Sarah's well-being and trust. The progression showed increasing intimacy and comfort, two people falling in love while destroying the person who had brought them together. Marcus was staring at the photographs with a mixture of guilt and calculation, his mind clearly racing through implications and potential responses. Sarah could see him evaluating options, weighing the costs of different approaches to managing the crisis he had created. His analytical nature, which had made him successful in architecture, was now focused on architectural damage control rather than genuine remorse or accountability. The baby in Elena's womb represented the future Marcus had chosen, a family he was creating with Sarah's sister while pretending to want children with his wife. Sarah thought about the fertility treatments she had endured, the hope and disappointment that had defined their recent years, and realized Marcus had been living an entirely different reality during those same months. While she struggled with hormones and procedures, he was creating new life with someone else. The revelation changed everything Sarah thought she knew about their marriage and their future. The plans they had made, the dreams they had shared, the financial and emotional investment in their life together, all of it had been built on lies that Marcus and Elena had been telling for months. Sarah was the only one who had been living authentically, the only one whose feelings and commitments had been genuine throughout their deception. The photographs would have to be shared with lawyers and possibly family members as evidence of the affair and Elena's pregnancy. Sarah realized she would need professional help navigating the legal and financial aspects of divorce, protection for her interests and their shared assets, and strategies for managing the inevitable custody arrangements that would bind Marcus and Elena together permanently while excluding Sarah from her own family's future. Marcus was reaching for his phone, possibly to call Elena and warn her about the discovery, when Sarah spoke the first time since revealing the photograph.
Her voice was calm and cold as she told him to put the phone away, that Elena would learn about the exposure soon enough, but that their conversation needed to happen first. The authority in her tone surprised them both, evidence of a strength Sarah had not known she possessed. The woman who had spent years accommodating Marcus's career demands, Elena's financial needs, and their parents' expectations was disappearing, replaced by someone who would prioritize her own interests and demand accountability from the people who had betrayed her trust. The transformation was beginning, sparked by betrayal but powered by a core of resilience that would carry Sarah through the destruction of everything she had believed about her life and family. The silence in their living room felt heavy enough to crush them both as Marcus stared at the scattered photographs, his face cycling through expressions of shock, guilt, and desperate calculation. Sarah watched him process the magnitude of his exposure, noting how his architect's mind immediately shifted into problem-solving mode rather than offering any genuine remorse or explanation for his betrayal. His first instinct was damage control, not accountability. Marcus finally looked up from the damning evidence, his eyes meeting Sarah's for the first time since she had revealed his secret. The man she had married seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger whose primary concern was managing the fallout from months of carefully orchestrated deception. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse with the weight of lies that could no longer be sustained. "Sarah, I can explain this," he began, but she raised her hand to stop him before he could launch into whatever rehearsed justification he had prepared for such a moment. The gesture surprised them both with its authority, evidence of a strength Sarah was discovering within herself as her world collapsed around her. She was done being managed and manipulated by people who claimed to love her while systematically destroying her trust. "Can you explain why my sister is pregnant with your child while I've been injecting hormones into my body for 3 years trying to give you a baby?" Sarah's voice was steady despite the fury building inside her, each word delivered with surgical precision designed to cut through his anticipated excuses. "Can you explain why you held my hand through 2 miscarriages while you were creating new life with Elena behind my back?"
Marcus flinched as if she had struck him, the stark reality of his actions laid bare in a way that made deflection impossible. Sarah could see him searching for words that might minimize the cruelty of his choices, some explanation that could make his betrayal seem less deliberate and calculated than the evidence suggested. But there was no softening the fact that he had been living an entirely different life while pretending to share her dreams and struggles. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible as he struggled to meet her gaze. "Elena and I never planned for it to go this far. It started as friendship, just someone to talk to when things got complicated between us during the fertility treatments. She understood the pressure we were both under." Sarah felt a bitter laugh escape her throat as she processed his attempt to frame the affair as some kind of therapeutic outlet rather than a fundamental betrayal of their marriage vows. The idea that Elena had provided emotional support during their fertility struggles while simultaneously sleeping with Marcus was so twisted that Sarah could barely comprehend the level of deception required to maintain such a charade. "So you decided to work through our marriage problems by sleeping with my sister?" Sarah's tone remained controlled, but Marcus could hear the dangerous edge creeping into her voice. "You thought the solution to our fertility issues was to get Elena pregnant instead? Did you consider that maybe I deserved to know that my husband was exploring other options for fatherhood?" Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing toward the window as if distance might provide some refuge from the consequences of his choices. His reflection in the glass showed a man wrestling with guilt and calculation in equal measure, someone who had convinced himself that his betrayal was somehow justified by circumstances beyond his control. When he turned back to face Sarah, his expression had hardened into something she barely recognized. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," Marcus said, his tone shifting from apologetic to defensive. 3 years of appointments and procedures and disappointments, watching you blame yourself for something that might not even be fixable. Elena was there when you were too wrapped up in your own pain to notice that I was struggling too." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow, the suggestion that her grief over their fertility struggles had somehow driven him into her sister's arms. She stared at Marcus in disbelief, realizing that he had constructed an entire narrative in which he was the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of betrayal. His ability to rationalize his choices revealed a capacity for self-deception that made Sarah question everything she thought she knew about him. "So this is my fault." Sarah's voice rose for the first time since discovering the photographs, years of suppressed anger finally finding expression. "You thought the solution to our fertility issues was to get Elena pregnant instead? Did you consider that maybe I deserved to know that my husband was exploring other options for fatherhood?" Marcus abruptly paced toward the window as if distance might provide some refuge from the consequences of his choices. His reflection in the glass showed a man wrestling with guilt and calculation in equal measure, someone who had convinced himself that his betrayal was somehow justified by circumstances beyond his control. When he turned back to face Sarah, his expression had hardened into something she barely recognized. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," Marcus said, his tone shifting from apologetic to defensive. 3 years of appointments and procedures and disappointments, watching you blame yourself for something that might not even be fixable. Elena was there when you were too wrapped up in your own pain to notice that I was struggling too. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow, the suggestion that her grief over their fertility struggles had somehow driven him into her sister's arms. She stared at Marcus in disbelief, realizing that he had constructed an entire narrative in which he was the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of betrayal. His ability to rationalize his choices revealed a capacity for self-deception that made Sarah question everything she thought she knew about him. "So this is my fault?" Sarah's voice rose for the first time since discovering the photographs, years of suppressed anger finally finding expression. "You thought the solution to our fertility issues was to get Elena pregnant instead? Did you consider that maybe I deserved to know that my husband was exploring other options for fatherhood?" Sarah's phone buzzed with another text message, and this time she looked at it deliberately, noting Marcus's anxious reaction to the sound. Elena's message was typically casual, asking if Sarah wanted to grab dinner later because she had something exciting to share. The timing was either incredibly coincidental or carefully orchestrated, possibly Elena's way of preparing to reveal the pregnancy before someone else exposed the affair.
Is this her way of telling me about the baby? Sarah held up the phone so Marcus could see Elena's message, watching his face confirm her suspicion that they had discussed how and when to reveal the pregnancy.
Was tonight supposed to be the big announcement that would somehow make this betrayal easier to swallow? Marcus's silence was answer enough. Sarah realized that Elena's dinner invitation was probably the opening move in a coordinated strategy to control the narrative around their affair and pregnancy. They had likely rehearsed explanations and prepared responses to minimize the damage to their reputations while managing Sarah's expected emotional reaction. The level of planning required for such coordination made their betrayal even more devastating. "How long have you been planning to tell me?" Sarah asked, her voice regaining its earlier steadiness as shock gave way to cold fury. "Did you think you could control how I found out, manage my reaction to minimize the consequences for yourselves? Was there ever going to be a moment when you took responsibility for what you've done, or were you planning to blame our marriage problems forever?" Marcus returned to the couch, sitting on the edge as if preparing to flee at any moment. His architect's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for one of the photographs, studying the evidence of his affair as if seeing it for the first time. The professional quality of the images suggested someone had been watching them for weeks or months, documenting their relationship with the thoroughness of a legal investigation. "Who took these pictures?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with anxiety about exposure beyond their immediate crisis. "Someone's been following us, photographing private moments. This feels like harassment or blackmail rather than coincidental discovery." Sarah had been wondering the same thing, but Marcus's concern about the photographer revealed his priorities clearly. He was more worried about who else might know about the affair than about the pain he had caused his wife. His immediate focus on damage control rather than accountability confirmed that he viewed their marriage as a reputation management problem rather than a relationship worth salvaging. "Does it matter who took them?" Sarah's tone was ice cold as she gathered the photographs into a neat stack, each image a testament to months of deception and betrayal. "The question isn't who documented your affair with my sister. The question is why you chose to have an affair with my sister in the first place." The distinction seemed to escape Marcus entirely as he continued to focus on external threats rather than internal accountability. Sarah realized she was witnessing the true character of the man she had married, someone whose first instinct during a crisis was self-preservation rather than genuine remorse or concern for the people he had hurt. The revelation was almost as devastating as the affair itself. Elena's pregnancy created complications that extended far beyond their marriage, binding Marcus and Elena together permanently while excluding Sarah from her own family's future. Sarah thought about holidays and family gatherings, about explaining to their parents why their first grandchild would be born from such circumstances, about navigating relationships with relatives who would be forced to choose sides in the aftermath of this betrayal. "Are you planning to marry her?" Sarah asked suddenly, the question emerging from practical considerations rather than emotional curiosity. "Is this pregnancy the beginning of your new family? Or are you hoping to maintain some kind of arrangement where you can have both relationships simultaneously?" Marcus looked genuinely shocked by the question, as if the long-term implications of his choices had not occurred to him beyond the immediate pleasure of the affair. His expression suggested someone who had been living moment to moment, without considering how his decisions would shape their future relationships and family dynamics. The pregnancy had apparently been an accident rather than a planned transition to a new life with Elena. "I haven't thought that far ahead," Marcus admitted, his honesty more damaging than any lie could have been. "Elena and I were taking things day by day, seeing how we felt about each other without making permanent commitments. The pregnancy changes everything, but we haven't discussed marriage or long-term plans." The casual nature of his response revealed how little consideration Marcus had given to Sarah's feelings or future throughout his affair with Elena. He had been treating their marriage as a temporary inconvenience while exploring other options, maintaining his relationship with Sarah as a safety net while pursuing passion with her sister. The calculation required for such compartmentalization was staggering in its emotional cruelty. Sarah stood up slowly,
her decision crystallizing as she realized that Marcus was fundamentally incapable of the accountability and remorse required to rebuild their marriage. He had betrayed her with the person she trusted most, created a child with Elena while pretending to want children with his wife, and his primary concern remained protecting himself from consequences rather than addressing the pain he had caused his wife. "I want you to leave," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that surprised them both. "Pack whatever you need for tonight and stay somewhere else while I decide how to handle this situation. I need space to think without having to look at your face and remember what you've done to our marriage and my family." Marcus started to protest, reaching toward her with the same hands that had held Elena intimately while promising Sarah his devotion. But Sarah stepped back, creating physical distance that reflected the emotional chasm his betrayal had opened between them. The man she had trusted with her life and dreams had revealed himself to be someone capable of breathtaking deception and cruelty. "This is my house, too," Marcus said, his tone shifting toward legal territory as he began calculating property rights and financial obligations. "We bought it together, and I have as much right to be here as you do. You can't just throw me out because you're upset about Elena and the pregnancy." The clinical language he used to describe her emotional response to discovering his affair revealed how thoroughly Marcus had disconnected from the reality of their marriage.
Upset was the word someone might use to describe a minor disappointment or temporary frustration, not the appropriate response to discovering that your husband had betrayed you with your sister and created a child behind your back. Sarah walked to the front closet and retrieved Marcus's overnight bag, the same leather satchel he used for business trips that now would serve a very different purpose. The practical action of preparing for his departure felt empowering after hours of emotional chaos, giving her concrete steps to take while processing the magnitude of his betrayal. She placed the bag on the coffee table next to the photographs, creating a visual representation of their choices. "You can stay at Elena's apartment," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fury building inside her. "Since you two have been spending so much time together anyway, it makes sense for you to make that arrangement official. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to have you available full-time now that your double life has been exposed." Marcus stared at the overnight bag as if it represented something he had not anticipated. Evidence that Sarah was prepared to take concrete action rather than simply processing her emotions privately. His calculation had apparently assumed that she would need time to work through her feelings before making any permanent decisions about their marriage, giving him opportunity to manage the situation gradually. "Sarah, we need to talk about this rationally," Marcus said, his tone taking on the patronizing quality he used when discussing complex architectural problems with clients who lacked technical knowledge. "There are financial considerations, legal implications, and practical matters that require careful planning. We can't make emotional decisions that we'll regret later." The suggestion that her response to his betrayal was emotional rather than rational revealed how completely Marcus misunderstood the situation he had created. Sarah had spent the afternoon processing evidence of months-long deception, calculating the implications of Elena's pregnancy, and evaluating the future of relationships that had been fundamentally altered by their choices. Her decision to ask him to leave was the result of careful consideration, not impulsive emotion. "The only irrational decision was trusting you and Elena," Sarah replied, her voice cutting through his attempt to reframe her response as temporary hysteria. "I've had several hours to think about the situation, and my conclusion is that I need space from both of you while I decide how to rebuild my life. That starts with you leaving tonight." Marcus began pacing again, his movement revealing anxiety about losing control of a situation he had managed carefully for months. The exposure of his affair had shifted power back to Sarah, forcing her to react to her decisions rather than managing her responses to his controlled revelations. His discomfort with the reversal was obvious as he struggled to find arguments that might delay his departure. Sarah's phone rang with Elena's name appearing on the screen.
the timing suggesting coordination between the siblings that Sarah now realized had been happening throughout their affair. The call represented Elena's attempt to maintain their sisterly relationship while hiding her pregnancy and affair, possibly hoping to gauge Sarah's emotional state before revealing her news during their planned dinner. "Answer it," Marcus said urgently, his tone revealing that he and Elena had discussed strategies for managing Sarah's discovery of their relationship. "Let her explain her side of the situation before you make any permanent decisions about our family relationships. There might be circumstances you don't understand." The suggestion that Sarah was missing crucial context about her husband's affair with her pregnant sister was so audacious that she almost laughed. Marcus was apparently hoping that Elena's manipulation skills might succeed where his rationalization had failed, that her sister's ability to create emotional confusion might provide him with the space he needed to minimize consequences. Sarah declined the call and immediately blocked Elena's number, the decisive action feeling like the first step toward reclaiming control over her life and relationships. The gesture sent a clear message that she was no longer available for manipulation or management by people who had been lying to her for months. Marcus watched her delete Elena's contact information with obvious alarm. "You can't cut Elena out of your life permanently," Marcus protested. His concern for Sarah's relationship with her sister revealed his continued investment in maintaining access to both women. "She's your family, and this pregnancy means she'll be connected to us forever, regardless of what happens between you and me. Blocking her number won't change the reality of our situation." The assumption that Sarah would eventually reconcile with Elena, possibly accepting some kind of blended family arrangement that allowed Marcus to maintain relationships with both sisters, demonstrated how thoroughly he had miscalculated the consequences of his choices. His affair had not simply complicated their marriage, it had destroyed the foundation of trust that made any ongoing relationship impossible. Sarah walked to their bedroom and began filling Marcus's overnight bag with clothes and toiletries. The methodical process provided structure during emotional chaos. Each item she packed represented a step towards separation, physical evidence of her determination to create space between herself and the people who had betrayed her trust so completely. Marcus followed her to the bedroom, and his anxiety increased as she made concrete preparations for his departure. The room they had shared for 5 years now felt contaminated by knowledge of his affair, every surface a potential site where he had planned deceptions or calculated lies to maintain his double life. Sarah could barely stand being in the space that had represented their intimacy and partnership. "Are you planning to file for divorce?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with concern about legal and financial implications. "Because if you are, we should discuss property division and asset protection before taking any formal steps. I don't want the situation to become more complicated than necessary." His focus on practical considerations rather than emotional repair confirmed that Marcus viewed their marriage as a business arrangement to be dissolved efficiently rather than a relationship worth fighting to save. Sarah realized that he had probably been evaluating exit strategies throughout his affair with Elena, calculating the costs of different approaches to ending their marriage while maintaining his financial security. Sarah zipped the overnight bag closed and handed it to Marcus, the weight of their failed marriage somehow contained in the leather satchel that would carry him away from their shared life. The symbolic nature of the moment was not lost on either of them. As Marcus accepted the bag with obvious reluctance, his final gesture of resistance to consequences he could no longer avoid. "I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown tonight," Marcus said, naming the same hotel where some of the photographs had been taken during his affair with Elena. The choice seemed deliberately provocative, a way of maintaining connection to the scene of his betrayal while claiming temporary homelessness. "We can talk tomorrow when you've had time to process everything." The assumption that a single night would be sufficient for Sarah to work through the emotional impact of discovering his months-long affair with her pregnant sister revealed how completely Marcus misunderstood the magnitude of his betrayal. He apparently expected her to compartmentalize her feelings as efficiently as he had managed his double life, moving quickly toward practical resolution rather than genuine accountability. Sarah followed Marcus to the front door, noting how he paused to look back at their living room as if memorizing details he might not see again. The photographs were still scattered across the coffee table, evidence of choices that had irrevocably altered their future and relationships. When he finally turned toward the door, his expression had shifted from guilt to calculation, the look of someone already planning his next moves. "This doesn't have to destroy everything we've built together," Marcus said as he opened the door, cool October air rushing into their heated conversation. "People work through affairs all the time, and Elena's pregnancy doesn't have to end our marriage if we're both committed to rebuilding trust and moving forward." The suggestion that Sarah should consider accepting Elena's pregnancy as a permanent part of their marriage was so audacious that she could barely process his words. Marcus was apparently hoping that her loyalty to family and commitment to their relationship might overcome her revulsion at his betrayal, creating some kind of blended arrangement that would allow him to maintain both relationships simultaneously. Sarah closed the door firmly behind Marcus, the sound echoing through their house like a period at the end of a sentence that had run far too long. The silence that followed felt different from the tense quiet that had dominated their conversation, peaceful rather than oppressive, the first moment of calm Sarah had experienced since discovering the photographs. She returned to the living room and gathered the evidence of Marcus's affair, studying each image with new eyes now that she was alone with her thoughts and feelings. The professional quality of the photographs suggested someone had invested significant time and resources in documenting the relationship, possibly building a case for legal proceedings or personal revenge against one or both of the participants. Sarah's phone buzzed with a blocked number. Undoubtedly, Elena calling from a different device after discovering that her primary number had been blocked. The persistence revealed Elena's anxiety about losing control of their relationship, her inability to accept that Sarah might not be available for manipulation and management during this crisis. Sarah declined the call and turned off her phone entirely. The house felt larger without Marcus's presence, rooms expanding to accommodate Sarah's thoughts and feelings without the pressure of his emotional management and damage control. She could finally process the full impact of the betrayal without worrying about his comfort or managing his guilt about the pain he had caused their marriage and family. Sarah made herself a cup of tea and returned to the couch, spreading the photographs across the coffee table in chronological order to study the progression of Marcus and Elena's relationship. The timeline revealed increasing intimacy and comfort over several months, two people falling in love while systematically deceiving the person who had brought them together and trusted them most completely. The earliest photographs showed casual meetings that could have been explained as innocent social interaction between in-laws, coffee dates and lunch meetings that might have been attributed to Elena's need for career advice or emotional support. But the body language and facial expressions revealed attraction and anticipation that went far beyond familial friendship or professional networking. Later images documented deliberate romantic encounters, carefully planned meetings in locations chosen for privacy rather than convenience. Marcus and Elena had clearly progressed from spontaneous attraction to sustained affair, creating opportunities to be together while maintaining elaborate lies about their activities and whereabouts. The calculation required for such sustained deception was staggering in its emotional cruelty. The final photograph showed Elena's developing pregnancy, her hand resting protectively on her small bump while Marcus looked at her with obvious adoration and pride. The image represented everything Sarah had wanted for herself, the family she had been struggling to create through fertility treatments, while her husband was building that same future with her sister behind her back. Sarah realized she needed professional help navigating the legal and emotional aspects of divorce, protection for her interests in shared assets, and strategies for managing family relationships that had been permanently altered by Marcus and Elena's choices. The complexity of separating a life so thoroughly intertwined required expertise she did not possess and emotional support from sources untainted by betrayal. The fertility treatments she had endured for 3 years suddenly seemed like elaborate forms of self-torture, hormone injections, and invasive procedures designed to solve a problem that had never existed. Marcus had been capable of creating children all along. He had simply chosen to do so with Elena rather than his wife. The realization added another layer of cruelty to his deception. Sarah thought about their joint bank accounts, the mortgage they shared, the vacation to Mexico they had booked for next month, all requiring untangling and division through legal processes she had never imagined needing. The practical aspects of divorce would force continued contact with Marcus while she was still processing the emotional impact of his betrayal, creating ongoing trauma rather than clean separation. The baby Elena was carrying would require custody arrangements and financial support that would bind her and Marcus together permanently, creating a family dynamic so twisted that Sarah could barely comprehend it. Her sister would become the mother of her ex-husband's child, forever connected to both of them through circumstances that made normal family relationships impossible. Her parents would need to be told about the affair and pregnancy, conversations that would shatter their understanding of both daughters and create family divisions that might never heal. David and Margaret had been anticipating grandchildren from Sarah and Marcus for years, making the irony of Elena providing their first grandchild through such circumstances particularly cruel. The extended family dynamics would be impossible to navigate, requiring careful choreography to avoid forcing relatives to choose sides or creating uncomfortable encounters at family gatherings. Some would inevitably blame Sarah for not satisfying her husband, while others would condemn Elena for betraying her sister. The family that had been Sarah's foundation would fracture into competing loyalties and bitter resentments. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief as she accepted that her marriage and relationship with Elena were both ending, that the people she had trusted most completely had revealed themselves to be capable of breathtaking cruelty and deception. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it was a growing determination to rebuild her life on foundations that could not be shaken by betrayal or manipulation. The woman who had accommodated Marcus's career demands, Elena's financial needs, and their parents' expectations was disappearing, replaced by someone who would prioritize her own interests and demand accountability from people who claimed to care about her. The transformation was beginning, sparked by betrayal, but powered by resilience that would carry Sarah through the destruction of everything she had believed about love and family. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and difficult conversations, financial planning and family confrontations that would determine the practical aspects of her new life. But tonight, Sarah was alone with her thoughts and feelings for the first time in months, free from the pressure of managing other people's comfort while processing her own pain and planning her future without them. 3 weeks after Marcus left their home, Sarah was sitting in divorce attorney Rebecca Chen's office overlooking downtown Denver, reviewing documents that would formally end her 8-year marriage. The legal terminology felt foreign and clinical, reducing years of shared dreams and intimate partnership to asset division and custody arrangements. Rebecca had been recommended by Sarah's colleague at the hospital, a nurse who had navigated her own difficult divorce with the same firm. The photographs provide clear evidence of adultery, which strengthens your position considerably in Colorado. Rebecca explained, her voice professional but compassionate as she outlined Sarah's legal options. However, the pregnancy complicates matters significantly.
Even though Elena isn't your husband's wife, their child will create permanent financial obligations that affect marital asset division. Sarah nodded, still struggling to process how her sister's pregnancy had become a factor in her divorce proceedings. The legal system would treat Elena's baby as Marcus's legitimate heir, entitled to support that would reduce his ability to pay spousal maintenance or divide their shared assets equitably. The irony was staggering. Elena's betrayal would continue to impact Sarah's financial security long after their relationship ended. "Have you considered DNA testing to confirm paternity?" Rebecca asked, making notes in Sarah's file. While the timeline and photographic evidence suggest Marcus is the father, legal certainty protects your interests during asset division. If there's any possibility Elena was involved with other men during the relevant time frame, paternity testing eliminates ambiguity. The suggestion hadn't occurred to Sarah, who had assumed Elena's pregnancy was definitely Marcus's child based on the apparent timeline of their affair. But Rebecca's question raised possibilities that added new layers of complexity to an already twisted situation. If Elena had been involved with multiple men simultaneously, the pregnancy might not be connected to Marcus at all, fundamentally altering the legal and emotional landscape. Elena has always been somewhat promiscuous, Sarah admitted, reluctantly, feeling disloyal even as she acknowledged her sister's romantic history. She's had multiple relationships overlap before, and she moved to Denver after a complicated situation in Los Angeles that involved several men. It's possible Marcus wasn't her only partner during this time frame. Rebecca made additional notes, her expression suggesting this information significantly changed their legal strategy. If Elena's pregnancy wasn't Marcus's child, his financial obligations would be limited to spousal support for Sarah rather than long-term child support that would affect their asset division. The possibility offered hope for a cleaner separation, though it would require forcing Elena to submit to paternity testing she might resist. "We'll include paternity testing as a condition of the divorce settlement," Rebecca decided, already calculating how this demand might affect negotiations with Marcus's attorney. If he refuses, we can petition the court to order testing. Either way, we establish legal certainty about his financial obligations before finalizing any agreements. Sarah left Rebecca's office with a thick folder of documents and a timeline for proceedings that would unfold over the next several months. The legal process felt surreal, transforming the intimate betrayal of her marriage into procedural steps and financial calculations that would determine her future security. She had never imagined needing such expertise, never anticipated that love and trust could be reduced to evidence and asset protection. Her phone had been silent since blocking Elena's numbers, but Sarah knew her sister was attempting contact through other channels. Her parents had called several times, confused about why Elena seemed upset and why Sarah wasn't returning calls about family dinner plans. The conversations she needed to have with David and Margaret were among the most difficult aspects of this entire situation. Sarah drove to her parents' house in Littleton for what she knew would be one of the hardest conversations of her life. David and Margaret lived in the same colonial home where Sarah and Elena had grown up, surrounded by family photographs that would take on new meaning once the truth about the affair and pregnancy was revealed. The familiar driveway felt like a portal to a simpler time when family relationships were based on genuine love rather than manipulation and betrayal. Margaret answered the door with her usual warm smile, immediately inviting Sarah in for coffee and catching up on recent events. The normalcy felt surreal given what Sarah needed to discuss. The contrast between her mother's expectations and the reality of Elena's pregnancy created cognitive dissonance that made speech difficult initially. "Elena mentioned she has exciting news to share with us," Margaret said as they settled in the kitchen that had been the heart of family life for decades. She seemed nervous but happy about something. I wondered if she might be dating someone seriously finally. She's been so secretive lately about her social life. Sarah realized Elena was preparing to announce her pregnancy to their parents, possibly planning to reveal Marcus as the father in her own carefully controlled narrative. The timing of Sarah's visit was crucial. She needed to establish the truth before Elena could manipulate their parents' understanding of the situation. "Mom, I need to tell you something difficult about Elena and Marcus," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "They've been having an affair for months, and Elena is pregnant with his child. I discovered their relationship 3 weeks ago through photographs someone sent me anonymously." Margaret's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips as she processed Sarah's words, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. The silence stretched between them as Margaret struggled to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the person capable of such betrayal. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "That's impossible," Margaret whispered, setting down her cup with shaking hands. "Elena would never hurt you like that. There must be some misunderstanding, some explanation that makes sense of whatever you think you saw in those photographs." David appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the tension he could sense from the living room where he had been reading. His expression shifted from casual curiosity to alarm as he took in Margaret's pale complexion and Sarah's obvious distress. Without being told, he seemed to understand that something fundamental had changed in their family dynamic. Sarah retrieved her phone and showed her parents several of the photographs, watching their faces as they recognized Marcus and Elena in unmistakably intimate situations. The evidence was irrefutable, too explicit to be explained away through misinterpretation or innocent context. David sank into a chair as Margaret began crying softly, both parents struggling to process the magnitude of Elena's betrayal.
"How long has this been going on?" David asked, his voice heavy with disappointment and confusion. "When did Elena and Marcus start this relationship, and why didn't you tell us sooner about what was happening?" Sarah explained the timeline as she understood it, the months of deception and coordination required to maintain the affair while pretending to maintain normal family relationships. She described discovering the photographs, confronting Marcus, and asking him to leave their home while she decided how to proceed with divorce proceedings and severed contact with Elena. Margaret stopped crying and looked up with sudden determination, her maternal instincts apparently overriding her shock about Elena's choices. "We need to call Elena immediately and get her side of this story. There might be circumstances we don't understand, reasons why this happened that don't excuse her behavior but explain how she could make such terrible decisions." The suggestion that Elena deserved an opportunity to justify her betrayal revealed how completely their parents misunderstood the situation they were facing. Sarah realized that Margaret's first instinct was protecting Elena rather than supporting the daughter who had been victimized, a pattern that had characterized their family dynamics throughout their childhood. "Elena has been trying to contact me for weeks through various numbers and social media accounts," Sarah said, her tone remaining calm despite her growing frustration. "I've blocked her because I don't want to hear explanations or justifications for what she's done. She's pregnant with my husband's child while I've been struggling with fertility treatments for 3 years. There's no explanation that makes that acceptable." David placed his hand over Margaret's, a gesture that seemed designed to prevent her from immediately calling Elena to manage the crisis according to her typical pattern of protecting her younger daughter from consequences. His expression suggested he understood the gravity of Elena's choices more clearly than his wife, recognizing that some betrayals were too fundamental to be explained away through family loyalty. "Sarah is right," David said quietly, his voice carrying authority that Margaret rarely challenged. "Elena made deliberate choices over months to deceive her sister and have an affair with Marcus. The pregnancy isn't an accident we can minimize. It's the result of sustained betrayal that destroys trust permanently." Margaret looked back and forth between her husband and daughter, her worldview shifting as she began to accept that Elena was capable of cruelty that went far beyond typical sibling rivalry or family drama. The Elena she thought she knew would never hurt Sarah so deliberately, but the evidence made denial impossible no matter how much she wanted to protect both daughters from the consequences of these choices. "What about the baby?" Margaret asked suddenly, her grandmother instincts emerging as she considered the innocent child who would be born into such complicated circumstances. "Regardless of how this pregnancy happened, that baby will be our grandchild. We can't punish an innocent baby for Elena and Marcus's mistakes." The question highlighted the impossible family dynamics that Elena's pregnancy would create, binding everyone together through blood relationships that couldn't be severed regardless of how they felt about the circumstances. Sarah had been struggling with the same realization, understanding that her parents would naturally want relationships with their grandchild, even if it meant maintaining contact with Elena and Marcus.
The baby changes everything for you and Dad, Sarah acknowledged, her voice reflecting the sadness of accepting that her parents would be forced to choose between supporting her and maintaining relationships with their grandchild. Elena knew that when she got pregnant, she was calculating that family loyalty would protect her from consequences because cutting her off would mean losing access to your grandchild. David's expression darkened as he realized the manipulation Elena had built into her choices, using pregnancy as insurance against family rejection. The strategic nature of her decisions revealed a level of calculation that transformed her behavior from impulsive mistake to deliberate family destruction, designed to protect her from accountability. Elena has always been manipulative, David said slowly, his voice reflecting years of accumulated observations he had apparently never articulated clearly. But using pregnancy to insulate herself from consequences while destroying your marriage represents a level of cruelty I didn't think she was capable of. Margaret was crying again, but her tears seemed different now, reflecting grief for the daughter she thought she knew, rather than sympathy for Elena's current situation. The Elena she thought she knew would never hurt Sarah so deliberately, but the evidence made denial impossible, no matter how much she wanted to protect both daughters from the consequences of these choices. Sarah's phone rang with an unknown number, probably Elena calling from yet another device in her persistent attempts to reestablish contact. The timing seemed almost coordinated, as if Elena somehow knew Sarah was having this conversation with her parents and wanted to insert herself into the narrative before Sarah could establish her version of events too firmly. "Answer it," Margaret said suddenly, her tone carrying surprising authority. "I want to hear what Elena has to say about this situation. If she's really pregnant with Marcus's child, she needs to explain herself to all of us immediately." Sarah declined the call instead, her refusal to engage with Elena's manipulation sending a clear message about boundaries that would define their relationship going forward. Her parents were surprised by Sarah's refusal to accommodate Elena's needs or demands for attention and support. "Elena will have to live with the consequences of her choices without my participation," Sarah said firmly, her voice reflecting a strength that seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. "I'm not available for manipulation or damage control while she figures out how to manage the crisis she created through her betrayal." David nodded approvingly, his expression suggesting pride in Sarah's newfound ability to establish boundaries with family members who had taken advantage of her loyalty and generosity for years. Margaret looked conflicted, torn between her natural instinct to mediate family conflicts and growing recognition that Elena's behavior couldn't be managed through typical family negotiation. Sarah spent the next 2 hours explaining the legal proceedings, her plans for rebuilding her life independently, and her decision to maintain no contact with Elena regardless of family pressure to reconcile for the sake of relationships with the coming grandchild. Her parents listened with growing understanding that the family they had known was ending, replaced by something more complex and painful that would require new approaches to loyalty and love. When Sarah left her parents' house, she felt simultaneously relieved and exhausted by the conversation that had finally established truth in place of the confusion Elena had been creating through her attempts at narrative control. David and Margaret would need time to process the information and decide how to manage their own relationships with Elena, but at least they understood the reality of what had happened. The drive back to her empty house gave Sarah time to reflect on how much her life had changed in just 3 weeks.
The woman who had been desperate to please everyone, who had spent years accommodating other people's needs while neglecting her own interests, was disappearing. In her place was someone harder, but more honest, someone who demanded accountability and refused to accept betrayal in the name of family loyalty. Sarah's house felt peaceful rather than lonely as she settled in for another evening alone with her thoughts and plans for the future. The silence that had once felt oppressive now represented freedom from the emotional management and damage control that had characterized her relationships with Marcus and Elena. She could finally think clearly, without worrying about other people's comfort or managing their guilt about the pain they had caused. Her work at the hospital had become a refuge, a place where her skills and compassion were valued without the complications of personal betrayal.
Her colleagues had noticed changes in her demeanor, a new confidence and directness that made her even more effective in her role managing the pediatric wing. The professional recognition felt particularly meaningful as she rebuilt her sense of identity independent from her failed marriage and damaged family relationships. 2 months after the initial discovery, Sarah received a call from Rebecca Chen with updates about the divorce proceedings and paternity testing results that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of the situation. Marcus had initially resisted the testing, but legal pressure had forced compliance, and the results were more shocking than anyone had anticipated. The DNA test came back negative, Rebecca said, her voice carrying the professional neutrality that characterized all her communications, but couldn't quite hide her surprise. Marcus is not the biological father of Elena's baby. The timeline and photographic evidence confirmed they had an affair, but the pregnancy isn't his child. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her as she processed information that changed everything about Elena's motivations and the legal implications of her divorce. If Marcus wasn't the father, Elena's pregnancy had been used as leverage in circumstances where she knew he wasn't actually responsible for the child she was carrying. The manipulation was even more calculated than Sarah had realized. Does this mean Elena was having affairs with multiple men simultaneously? Sarah asked, her voice reflecting the disbelief she felt about her sister's capacity for deception. Was Marcus just one of several relationships she was managing while pretending to be upset about her single status with our family? Rebecca confirmed that the negative paternity test suggested Elena had been involved with other men during the time frame when her affair with Marcus was documented, creating a web of deception that went far beyond the betrayal Sarah had discovered. Elena had apparently been using pregnancy as insurance against family rejection while knowing the baby wasn't Marcus's, adding layers of manipulation that were breathtaking in their complexity. This changes your divorce settlement significantly, Rebecca explained, her tone suggesting relief that Sarah's financial future was more secure than originally anticipated. Marcus has no child support obligations, which means more assets available for division and higher potential spousal maintenance. Elena's pregnancy is no longer a factor in your legal proceedings. Sarah hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence as she realized the full scope of Elena's deception. Her sister had been juggling multiple affairs while using pregnancy to manipulate family dynamics, knowing that the baby wasn't Marcus's, but allowing everyone to believe otherwise. The cruelty was so calculated that Sarah could barely comprehend the person Elena had revealed herself to be. The revelation meant Elena had destroyed Sarah's marriage for an affair that wasn't even the source of her pregnancy, betraying her sister for a relationship that was apparently just one of several she was maintaining simultaneously. The casual nature of her betrayal made it even more devastating. Evidence that Sarah's pain and family destruction had been incidental to Elena's broader pattern of deception. Sarah's phone rang immediately with Marcus's number, undoubtedly calling after receiving the same paternity results from his attorney. She let the call go to voicemail, no longer interested in his explanations or attempts to minimize his role in the destruction of their marriage. The fact that Elena's baby wasn't his child didn't change the months of lies and betrayal that had ended their relationship permanently. The voicemail Marcus left was long and rambling, a mixture of relief about the paternity results and attempts to use Elena's broader deception to minimize his own responsibility for their affair. He seemed to believe the negative test created opportunities for reconciliation, as if learning that Elena had been even more manipulative than originally believed somehow excused his participation in betraying Sarah. Sarah deleted the message without listening to it completely, her decision reflecting how thoroughly she had moved beyond interest in Marcus's explanations or justifications. The man who had held her hand through fertility treatments while sleeping with her sister was gone, replaced by someone whose primary concern was managing consequences rather than taking accountability for choices that had destroyed their marriage. Elena's attempts at contact had intensified after the paternity results became known, suggesting she was panicking about losing control of narratives she had been managing for months. Text messages from unknown numbers revealed increasing desperation as Elena realized her manipulation was being exposed systematically, her carefully constructed lies collapsing under legal scrutiny and family investigation. Sarah's parents called that evening with voices reflecting confusion and disappointment that went far beyond their initial reaction to learning about the affair. The revelation that Elena had been deceiving everyone about paternity while using pregnancy to manipulate family loyalty had shattered their understanding of their younger daughter completely. "We don't know who Elena really is," Margaret said, her voice small and broken in a way she had never heard before. "The daughter we thought we raised would never be capable of such elaborate deception and manipulation. We feel like we've been living with a stranger who is performing the role of our child." David's voice was harder when he took the phone, his tone reflecting a finality that suggested Elena had lost his support permanently. "Elena has been lying to everyone about everything for months, using pregnancy to manipulate family relationships while knowing the child wasn't even Marcus's? That level of calculation and cruelty is unforgivable." Sarah felt the unexpected sadness about her parents' pain, their grief over losing the daughter they thought they knew. Elena's deception had victimized everyone who loved her, destroying family relationships through manipulation that went far beyond typical conflict or disappointment. The Elena they had raised was apparently gone, replaced by someone capable of breathtaking cruelty disguised as family drama. The next several months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, career advancement, and careful reconstruction of Sarah's life independent from the people who had betrayed her. The divorce was finalized with a settlement that secured her financial future, the house she had shared with Marcus, and the freedom to build new relationships based on genuine trust rather than family obligation. Elena had apparently left Denver after the paternity results were revealed, moving back to Los Angeles, where her deception would be less visible to family members who now understood her capacity for manipulation.
She had sent one final letter attempting to justify her choices and blame Sarah for being too focused on work and fertility treatments to notice Marcus's unhappiness, but Sarah had returned it unopened. Marcus had attempted reconciliation several times, apparently believing that Elena's broader deception somehow minimized his role in their affair and marriage destruction. His inability to understand that his betrayal was unforgivable, regardless of Elena's other lies, revealed how completely he misunderstood the nature of trust and accountability in marriage. Sarah's work at the hospital had expanded into supervisory roles that utilized her natural leadership abilities and emotional intelligence in ways that felt more meaningful than ever before. The recognition from colleagues and patients provided validation that her worth wasn't dependent on maintaining relationships with people who were capable of systematic deception and betrayal. 1 year after discovering the photographs that ended her marriage, Sarah was sitting in her garden on a Saturday morning, reading and drinking coffee in the peaceful silence that had replaced the emotional chaos of managing other people's crises and guilt. The woman who had once accommodated everyone else's needs while neglecting her own had been replaced by someone who demanded honesty and reciprocity in all relationships. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father, a photograph of him and Margaret at their grandson's first birthday party. Elena had apparently invited them to Los Angeles to meet the child who had been born into such complicated circumstances, and they had decided to maintain a relationship with their grandchild despite their disappointment in Elena's choices. Sarah studied the photograph of her parents holding a baby who looked nothing like Marcus, confirmation that Elena's pregnancy had been part of a larger pattern of deception that went far beyond the affair that destroyed Sarah's marriage. The child was innocent of his mother's manipulations, but his existence would forever represent the family destruction that Elena had orchestrated through calculated betrayal. David had included a message explaining that Elena was living with the baby's actual father, a man she had been seeing secretly while conducting affairs with Marcus and apparently other men simultaneously. The revelation completed the picture of Elena's deception, showing how thoroughly she had been manipulating everyone who cared about her while constructing elaborate lies to protect herself from consequences. Sarah felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief as she realized her family would never be what it once was, that Elena's choices had created permanent divisions that couldn't be healed through time or forgiveness. But beneath the grief was growing peace about the authentic life she was building, relationships based on genuine care rather than obligation or manipulation.
The garden Marcus had helped her plant was thriving under her solitary care, producing vegetables and flowers that provided satisfaction without requiring negotiation or compromise with people whose priorities conflicted with her own. The metaphor wasn't lost on Sarah as she considered how much more productive her life had become once she stopped trying to manage other people's growth at the expense of her own. Sarah's career continued advancing as her leadership skills were recognized through promotions and professional opportunities that utilized her natural abilities in ways her previous life had never allowed. The emotional energy she had been spending on managing Marcus's career needs and Elena's financial crises was now available for her own professional development and personal fulfillment. The fertility treatments that had consumed so much time and emotional resources during her marriage were a distant memory, replaced by contentment with a life that didn't require children to feel complete. Sarah had discovered interests and passions that had been buried under years of accommodating other people's dreams while postponing her own goals and desires. New relationships had emerged slowly, built on foundations of mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than family obligation or romantic desperation. Sarah's standards for friendship and potential romance had been fundamentally altered by experiencing betrayal from the people she had trusted most completely, creating filters that eliminated manipulative or dishonest people early in any interaction. The anonymous photographer who had documented Marcus and Elena's affair had never been identified, but Sarah had long since stopped wondering about their motivations or identity. The truth had been revealed regardless of its source, and her gratitude for learning about the betrayal early rather than discovering it through Elena's pregnancy announcement was genuine and lasting. Elena had sent several letters over the months since leaving Denver, attempting to reestablish contact and justify her choices through elaborate explanations that revealed her continued inability to accept accountability for the pain she had caused. Sarah had returned all correspondence unopened, maintaining boundaries that protected her peace and progress from Elena's ongoing attempts at manipulation. Marcus had eventually stopped attempting reconciliation, apparently accepting that his betrayal had consequences that couldn't be managed through apology or explanation. His last communication had been through attorneys regarding final financial matters, reflecting his recognition that their relationship was ended permanently despite his initial hopes for damage control and eventual reunion. Sarah's house had been redecorated to reflect her own preferences rather than compromises with Marcus's taste or budget considerations based on Elena's anticipated visits. Every room now felt authentically hers, decorated with colors and furnishings that brought genuine pleasure rather than diplomatic neutrality designed to accommodate other people's preferences. The silence that had once felt lonely now represented freedom from the constant emotional labor of managing other people's feelings while suppressing her own needs and reactions. Sarah could finally think clearly without worrying about how her decisions might affect people who had proven themselves incapable of reciprocal consideration for her well-being. Professional therapy had helped Sarah process the trauma of betrayal while developing tools for recognizing and avoiding manipulative people in future relationships. The investment in her mental health had provided returns that extended beyond healing from Marcus and Elena's betrayal, creating skills for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. 2 years after the photographs arrived, Sarah was living a life that felt genuinely authentic for the first time in decades. The woman who had once been desperate for approval from people who were incapable of genuine love had been replaced by someone who demanded honesty and reciprocity while offering the same in return. The transformation had been painful but ultimately liberating. Elena's betrayal had revealed the person Sarah was capable of becoming once she stopped accommodating manipulative behavior in the name of family loyalty. The strength that emerged from surviving such fundamental betrayal had created confidence and boundaries that made future deception virtually impossible, protecting her from people who viewed relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than mutual support. Sarah's story had become one of transformation rather than victimization, evidence that betrayal could catalyze growth rather than simply causing destruction. The family she was building through chosen relationships based on genuine care felt more authentic than the biological connections that had been contaminated by manipulation and conditional love. The woman who had once been willing to endure almost anything to maintain family relationships had learned to value her own peace over other people's comfort, her own truth over diplomatic fiction designed to protect people from consequences of their own choices. The lesson had been expensive but ultimately invaluable, creating a foundation for authentic relationships that could not be shaken by future betrayal or manipulation.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.